Another point you make is that if that these people they had an ideology that they were committed to economically and politically, and they were unsophisticated about it. And like the chief thing you said is almost counterintuitive, but like the chief goal was not the expansion of territory in which slaves could be held, or people could be held in bondage, or land that could be acquired. It was the protection of slave property itself anywhere in the world. Or particularly the Western Hemisphere. Totally.
So it's always about with Cuba, it's always like, oh, we want to seize Cuba. We want to make, Cuba like 8 slave states. We want the balance of power in Congress, yada, yada, yada. That's like often how we think about this. But I think they were thinking, like globalists, and they wanted, they wanted to protect the sort of, for material, but also for ideological reasons, protect the sort of security of this form of property internationally. And so, various sort of efforts by Britain or, by other sort of anti-slavery, international forces to sort of, undermine Cuban or Brazilian slavery, this, Southern leaders, and therefore the United States was sort of there to protect and defend, or serve and protect, I guess, international slavery as well as American slavery.
So like this ideology, like, it's an economic system, but it depends on kind of a culture and ideology. Like, what was the slave power? Like, how would you like characterize how they viewed the world and how they viewed human bondage?
That's a serious question. Can I give an unserious answer?
Yes, go ahead.
I want to do a historical analogy here with the proviso that 99% of historical analogies are bullshit, right?
This is a good one.
99%, yeah. It's like usually the sort of garnish that you put on an op-ed because you're out of ideas and you need to get paid for your 800 words. So you come up with some, you open an encyclopedia and point your finger to it. But 1% are good, the ones that are developed by Frederick Engels and myself. So this one, I do think there's a case, and this doesn't work on a lot of levels because they were globalists, because it doesn't work as political economy, but I think there's a case just culturally that the slave power, or that the kind of aggressive pro-slavery class in the antebellum republic was kind of like the alt-right today if they were actually in power, if they were the ruling class. Because on one hand, you have these extreme fringe figures, these guys who have these utterly like insane opinions, that are sort of basement dwelling dorks, like George Fitzhugh, who's writing like crazy theories about how slavery is the only humane system of
it should be extended.
Labor.
Ideally, should be extended to white people.
Right.
Yeah.
So slavery could be extended to white people. He's got this idea.
Okay,
imagine that.
Just real quick before we get too far, who was George Fitzhugh?
He was the Ricky Vaughn of the
basically.
All right.
He really was.
Basically, he was a sort of pro-slavery intellectual. He wrote very widely and aggressively about the in defense of slavery against abolitionists and so on. He's cited by other important slaveholders. But anyway, so they have these weird future imaginings of a world in 1950. This suits people who like alt history, where the U.S. has a republic of 100 million slaves. They have these almost apocalyptic, from our perspective, visions of the future that are really dark. They've got weird racial things, like Fitzhugh was really into this idea that the arc of history bent towards the southern races, like southern white races. So like the South was sort of like the Rome and Greece of like classical antiquity, and that they were fated to sort of dominate and conquer the North for some sort of like racial reasons, like the Romans were fated to conquer the fucking
Gauls or
Franks or whatever.
Bitch ass Teutons.
Yeah. So it's like, it would be like if you had an alt-right today that was like, instead of like Saxon Wrath or something, it would be like, I don't know, Latin Vengeance or something, or whatever.
Etruscan Revenge.
Well, was it one of the guys who worked on Rand Paul's campaign out of the Southern Avenger?
Yeah, exactly.
Southern Avenger is my favorite superhero. If you say ad hominem 3 times in a mirror, he shows up and warns you about fleet-footed urban types.
But like, okay, so wait, I have a few more things on this. So, but there's some really sinister stuff here with these slaveholders, right? Like, not unsurprisingly, but beyond the fact that they literally owned, 4 million people as chattel, but. They were also into this sort of burgeoning racial science. These guys were collecting skulls and measuring them and talking about doing weird experiments on like black people's lungs to sort of, identify different lung capacities. It's this really dark, sort of sinister edge to this stuff that is very, creepy, alt-right racist. But And there's actually a famous theory of the pro-slavery intellectual that essentially they were David Bryan Davis made this argument that they're basically loser fail sons who are intellectuals in an anti-intellectual culture, right? They're Southerners who are like reading the classics and trying to like generate these highbrow arguments for slavery, but no one gives a shit because it's the antebellum South and no one reads. So they're trying to like be really smart. They're trying to like know the anime, like these Pepe guys, to impress the sort of tough, like brawny Southern politicians, who actually have never opened a book. And there's some truth to that, except it unlike the current alt-right, I think it worked because you have people like Alexander Stevens or Jefferson Davis who are like then quoting or citing these and effectively mouthing these crazy racial theories on the floor of the Senate, and these people have power.
Yeah, the South Carolina was founded by second sons of like Caribbean. No, seriously.
Yeah.
Because the Caribbean, the planters in the Caribbean, they would give their once they established their plantations, they would then hand them off to their firstborn son, and then what do the rest of these assholes do? And a lot of them packed up and settled South Carolina. That's what the crescent on the South Carolina's flag represents. Is fail sonnery, basically.
I mean, that's why Ignatius J. Reilly is such an all-time great character, because a lot of modern evil stems from that kind of foul sonnery, of being the only guy who's read a book in a room full of guys with 85 IQs. Yeah. You can get a lot of, there's a lot of retelling through history with all these regimes, like, the Confederacy or the Third Reich, for that matter, where they were just highly advanced thinkers, when really they were just moderately well-read foul sons surrounded by
They're that guy in jail
dopes.
that we got in the letter. They're the murderer in jail.
Right.
They're the alt-right nerd in jail.
Oh yeah, what was that again?
We got a letter from someone who does prison outreach, and one of the people talked to is this.
He's like, I read.
Multiple murderer. So like somebody who should get like a lot of like credentials and respect in prison for the heaviness of their crime, but like none of the gangs will hang out with him. Like the AB, even though he's like he fetishizes his
Germanic heritage,
his Germanic heritage,
Bavarian rap.
The AB is like, get the fuck out of here, nerd. We want to lift weights.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing about so these guys, like, you have this kind of, I mean, to go inappropriately make more contemporary analogies, like, so you got the Ricky Vaughn. I think George Fitzhugh's right. I think James D.B. DeBow, though, who is like the publisher of DeBow's Review, which is like the Breitbart essentially of the sort of Southern pro-slavery intellectual class.
Did he also die in a diaper?
Yeah,
not sure on that.
After he died, there was probably like a post-Reconstruction movement that would have been like, he would have hated this. Yeah. he would have hated the Klan.
James D.B. DeBow would.
There was also a theory that like he was killed by like a blow dart shot by William Lloyd Garrison.
Yeah, he was actually the director of the U.S. Census. I mean, like, this guy, like, literally, who's like an insane autodidactic, creep, who is appointed by, essentially via his buddy Jefferson Davis as Secretary of War in the Pierce administration to be like the superintendent of the census, and then so unsurprisingly he develops all these like crazy tables to prove racial inferiority, because these guys love math. They love arithmetic.
That's another thing they have in common with the most annoying assholes of today.
Yeah,
but I want to get into more about like what is in like the 19th century version of like the highbrow intellectual argument for like why slavery is both just and moral.
Well, right. I mean, the thing is, they make a number of arguments, but the one that in my book that I think actually has received less attention, because sometimes people, talk about this sort of paternalist argument, and later people wanted to find an anti-capitalist argument in it, and you can find it if you look hard enough, but it's obviously a bad anti-capitalist argument. Instead of preventing revolution or instead of a revolution against the sort of bourgeois class by proletarian revolution, it's by proletarian enslavement. But the most interesting pro-slavery argument I think that I found that is in league with some of this alt-right stuff today is, when they talk about race realism, it's this idea that like there are these truths that people are too afraid based on like liberal sentimentality to face. That there's this sort of like the dark reality of the world in the 1850s is, okay, you soft-headed, like muddle-brained Northern abolitionists who are sentimentalists, who are like weak, who are, who essentially lack, they lack masculinity, but they also lack a sort of steely will to confront the hard realities of the market, which basically demands enslaved labor.
Yeah.
And not just exploitation, but like racially, and then also the laws of science, like through all these like kooky experiments, they think are sort of ordained by God, but also by just like hard science, hard laws of economics, and anyone who sort of mushily tries to wriggle out of this, is somebody like Louisa McCord. One of the most interesting characters in the book is sort of the Ann Coulter of the antebellum South, Louisa McCord, who had all sorts of, she was constantly comparing black people's brains to invertebrate shellfish, and she was, I don't think it's crazy to say she was an evil woman, but incredibly smart and in her weird way, and very aggressive. And it was all about, her most powerful essays were about this idea that like you have to face the facts, and like only we have possession of the facts because you're too sentimental to face them.
Well, I mean, I know a lot of Northerners probably think of the antebellum South and just think, "Oh, what a bunch of misogynists." But here was a woman,
She was
publishing and writing and just being an intellectual.
Her voice was amplified.
I can think slavery was a horrible crime, and also think it's cool that a woman rose head high. Both can be true.
Both can be true. Well, I think it's funny because we think of these alt-right guys now and like their embrace of European identity. Solidarity, but like wasn't one of the leading kind of kooky edges of pro-slavery thinking, and it's interesting to wonder how far it would have gone if the war hadn't happened when it did. The realization for a lot of these guys that like white Northerners were a different race.
Like
that literally, like it's like, yes, these are racially inferior, but like these other white people are also inferior.
Well, during the Civil War, you mean like this idea of like Yankee, inferiority to like sort of. I mean, this was
like,
Fitzhugh was going in that
about,
direction.
Like how well they came from we come from Norman stock,
right.
And they're like pasty,
like
Anglos, and they're like clearly an
Gallic
inferior.
fury.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. We are the sort of Latinate races, and they are the sort of crude, clodhoppers of the sort of northern forests who can't compete with us.
Let's not forget how many Irish people were pressed into service in the Union Army, and we all know about them.
Yeah. We don't want you. I mean, I guess we're going to go there.
Speaking of the degenerate races,
that's actually why Irish Americans are allowed to be racist today, is because of how many of them fought.
We fought for your fucking freedom.
Yeah,
I get to say that word.
That's why Mark Wahlberg is half Irish. That's why he got off like blinding.
That's why he got to beat that Vietnamese guy
because they were like, "Well, you have like a racial credit because of the Civil
And I'll
War."
tell you right now, if I'd been there at Ford's Theater, Lincoln wouldn't have died. I would have done a roundhouse kick, knocked him right out of the fucking box.
Can we talk about John C. Calhoun? He's a figure that comes up quite a bit. He's one of the big boys.
I kind of think of him as like the worst figure in American political history. Like just genuine, like one of the worst influences we've ever had.
It's hard to look at a picture of John C. Calhoun with those like haunted hollow eyes.
Yeah.
Don't give me your fucking Manson lamps. Just fucking stop.
Evil. He looks fucking evil.
Yeah.
Okay. Explain though, who was he and why was he important?
So John C. Calhoun is
John C. Word Calhoun. I call him.
John C. Calhoun was a South Carolina planter who initially sort of was a nationalist in the 1820s, and then he sort of in the nullification crisis. If we're going to do like a history lesson here, he became a leading defender of slavery and South Carolina's low tariff. And then he kind of gets stereotyped in a way. He's sort of seen as a sort of go-to pro-slavery Southerner. And we think of him as the sort of ultimate sectionalist who sort of prefigured the Confederacy and Southern separatism. I mean, I guess my thing in the book is that he was also U.S. Secretary of State, and he was also the U.S. Secretary of State who brought in the Republic of Texas, the Lone Star State, which is an independent slaveholding republic. And Calhoun did that not in order to strengthen the Confederacy, but in order to expand this vast Southern empire, which was the United States. He was I don't think this idea that he was some historians will be like he's a nationalist who then became this separatist and gave up on the United States. I think in a way he always sustained this belief that the Southern ruling class should be the national ruling class, and that's why he's an important figure.
Yeah, because one thing you note in the book, and I think is very important, is the degree to which states' rights rhetoric and the Jeffersonian fetish for small government and skepticism of federal power was really just instrumental. It was useful when it was in the interest of slavery, but expansionist. Territorial expansion, military expansion.
That's a big.
That's like they were fine with that if they felt like it was serving the ends. Like you have the chapter about the expansion of the Navy, like what they wanted, and it was largely driven by these slaveholders who claimed to hold the mantle of the Jeffersonian tradition.
Small government, laissez-faire.
They wanted a massive increase in the Navy in a way that threw in the face of that entire tradition. They completely threw it out of the.
And in some ways, the soul of the book is Jeff Davis, who's the ultimate. I wrote a book whose soul is Jefferson Davis. Sorry, I hate myself. But in some ways, he was the Secretary of War under Pierce in the 50s. And, he did the same thing for the Army in a sense that Upshur and some of these other Southerners had done for the Navy in the 40s, or he attempted to. The largest peacetime increase in the antebellum Army. I mean, it was still a tiny pipsqueak army, but he was modernizing it. He actually had people go to Europe to sort of study the Prussians. He wanted a Prussian-style, staff organization. He had people go to Algeria. He was always comparing westward development of the U.S. to the French and Algeria on the model of French colonialism. He was very upfront about the sort of racial and the sort of racial hierarchy of empire that should be sustained by a strong, powerful U.S. state.
Who is the biggest incel among the?
Okay, well, do you want to give me my? You want to do my little Volcel incel theory?
Yeah,
of the
because
Civil War?
that, as we've discovered, and it happens over and over again, the Volcel incel battle is the battle for the soul of humanity. It's been going on since the dawn of time. The forces of Volcel are the forces of good. Incels the forces of evil.
So you may have seen the film Lincoln. I think you do.
We talked about it last week.
We were going to do how many podcasts about the film Lincoln?
Yeah.
But so at the end, and one of the cornier touches in that movie is at the end, Tommy Lee Jones is kind of he's reading the 13th Amendment aloud, sort of with his housekeeper, who is his his mistress in effect. Lydia Smith is the character. He lived with his black housekeeper for 20 years, and they had a romantic relationship. But what you don't know about Thaddeus Stevens is for the previous 56 years of his life, he was straight up Volcel. He did not. There is even a letter. There's a letter. Let me find this thing. I have this letter where he writes about how. He has never seen. Hold on, we can find this. Where is it? All right, we can. It's okay to be.
We can edit this out.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
he says. Where is it?
Women are not human.
I pretend. So he's when he was in Pennsylvania politics in the 30s. He's accused of being of fornication by fathering a child out of wedlock. And he writes to his friend, "So far from being a seducer, I vow to God that I have never learned, except by description, the meaning of the maidenhead." The meaning of maidenhead. So he's straight up. I mean, although I guess obviously he's read some erotic stories or something. I don't know.
He's never seen.
He's never
Yo, what a shock. Another man who can't find the G-spot. You know what I'm talking about, ladies? She knows what I'm talking about. She knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, he may have listened to, the 19th century Rich Piana and had all these ideas about how to the 39 orgasm.
You speed bag that shit.
Yeah. After during Reconstruction, that's when Dan Quinn Time Traveler happened. And Dan used the Stevia time machine to go back and be like, "Oh my God, you basically deserve to know the secrets of the violin." John C. Calhoun, listen up. I would basically make you a millionaire by letting you throw punches on me and proving that the plantation system was doomed, homeboy, and I'll be smoking tobacco crop dusted with stevia, man.
Just 30 hits straight in a row, back to back.
In the motherfucking weed smoking Olympics, oh my God, I would beat the best weed smoker in the CSA. Listen up, homeboy. You don't know where the Maidenhead is? All right, so you put two fingers on and around the Maidenhead. You play the clit like a swizzle stick flute that it is, and you are in triple-digit orgasms with your housekeeper, homeboy.
Okay, but
I'm imagining Dan Quinn incident at Owl Creek Bridge where they're about to hang him, but he just pulls up his shirt and he's just like, "Yo, you see that, homie?" And they're like, "Respect."
Dan Quinn was basically John Brown. He was John Brown. He's the same thing.
Yeah. The
So-
etched
so
abolitionist. So,
Stevens
anyway,
was a
Stevens
straight up Volcel.
basically Volcel for the first 56 years of his life. We do know that there is an anecdote of a woman who he did have several flirtations, and at one point a woman. One of his biographers talks about a woman sort of proposing that he like buy her a diamond ring or something like that, and she gets a little edgy, and he just like ghosts on her and never sees her
Total
again.
Volcel.
So I think it's complete
He's got
Volcel.
to keep his essence. He's got to keep his essence for the fight.
Nah, dude, he's a fuckboy, dude. I've read Medium posts about guys like this.
Okay, so that's the North. This is arguably the second most important Northerner during the Civil War and the most important after the Civil War. So the vice president of the Confederacy, a little dude named Alexander Hamilton Stevens, was a Georgian, pro-slavery to the core. Actually, an incredibly creepy guy. He was about 5'7", 75 pounds. Nobody believes this, but he was 75 pounds according to his biographers.
Manlet.
His bones were
Total manlet.
yeah. His bones were like visible through his translucent skin.
Oh my
There's
God.
no end of antebellum letters and print journalism comparing him to a corpse and a zombie. But he is, an incredibly powerful pro-slavery politician in Georgia. He becomes VP of the Confederacy. Absolute incel. All of his documents, all of his, at no point has he ever been recorded to have any contact with a woman, and no woman would surely have had any
Of
contact
course
with him.
not. Yeah, he was a
or
fucking
man,
deep sea-
or man. I
he
should
was
say,
a deep sea creature. For
or man.
Christ's sake.
Yeah, no, he was an absolute ghoul.
Wow, what a shock. Yep.
So
Volcel,
Volcel
incel.
versus incel,
Explain
and guess who wins?
fucking Volcel, baby.
It is better to have access to and deny
Because
than
it
to
shows its inner
want
strength.
and seek.
Incel creates bitterness. It creates anger that then overtakes your soul.
This is what Star Wars is about.
Yes.
Basically, like
Anakin Star Wars was incel.
yeah.